I will officially go ahead and get us started then. Welcome, everybody. I was just saying to our panelists when we were in the kind of green room on Zoom, I haven't been nervous for something in a while. I mean, like life makes me nervous sometimes, but as far as facilitating or hosting something like this, I did a lot of this type of work for a long time, but never quite this personal maybe or not feeling such a big responsibility to do a good job with it. My goal is really for folks to feel supported when they leave here, even if the next step is to get more support. So I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. I'll invite the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping as well, and then we'll get into our panel discussion. And then there's also going to be time for quite a bit of time I've left for Q&A, which I'll share a little bit more about in a second. But for anybody who doesn't know me, my name's Lauren Roberts. I use she and her pronouns. I'm currently based in Denver, but I'm originally from Indiana. I've spent several years in DC and New York as well. My background's mostly in political work, but if you know my story, you know that it took some unexpected turns where 10 years ago, I experienced some pretty intense workplace abuse, both from my direct supervisor as well as our boss. And it took many, many years of tweeting and emailing people and trying to get some progress, I guess, to even be able to report what happened to me. I still haven't formally been able to do that. And I'm one of a lot of workers who realized that the only way there's ever going to be accountability was to go to the press. And that's why we're here today. Oftentimes there's not an HR process, or if there is, it's not independent. And I know a lot of people here today might be in that exact same situation that I was in. And honestly, even though I can't say it's been a pleasant and rainbows and butterflies experience, something I always say to folks who are considering coming forward and weighing the pros and cons of it, there's ups and downs for both options, whether you stay quiet and just try to move on with your life, or whether you do speak out. For me, speaking out, which I've been doing since 2017, as painful as it can be and as difficult as some of the consequences have been for me, has totally been preferable to what it felt like to stay silent and wonder if other people, in my case, particularly young women, were being targeted and hurt by the same person who hurt me. It feels a lot more empowering for me to just not shut up, basically. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from and what brought me here today. Elise, I'm wondering if you would drop the poll into the chat. It's totally optional, but if folks want to drop in what brought you here today, it won't be visible, I don't think, to other attendees. But I'm just kind of curious. And then there's also a question about whether you've ever spoken on or off the record to journalists before, which is what we're really digging into today. Brief housekeeping is that attendees can't see each other. No one who signed up as an attendee will be coming off mic. That'll just be for me and the panelists. My friend Elise Shrock is here. She's signed in as a panelist and host because she's handling any back-end technical stuff that comes up, any security stuff that comes up. I don't anticipate that being an issue, but if there's someone saying weird, harassing things to me in the chat or to one of our panelists, like, we'll take care of that. Elise has really had my back over the last 10 years and definitely since I first started trying to get some accountability in my sexual harassment, sexual abuse case in Indianapolis since 2017. And yeah, I'm really grateful to her for being here and being part of this today in this way. Other housekeeping is that this is recorded. I'm not sure yet if this is becoming a podcast episode, if I'm going to throw it up on YouTube. I do just want the recording to be accessible to people so that they can get this information that would have helped me so much all those years ago. So just keep that in mind. The only communication from attendees that might be public on that recording is we might read out your question that you submit, which you can submit anonymously. So during the Q&A portion, there's a little check mark. I'll remind you, but you can always select submit it anonymously. Let's see. Just checking if there's anything else. I'm keeping your email address private. I'm keeping your names private. I think that covers it. Elise, did I miss anything else as far as security, safety? Captions are available if you want them.
I think that's it. And I'm just going to say that I'm going to go off camera so that we can focus on panelists. And thanks everybody for being here.
Great. Thanks, Elise. All right. Well, yeah, I would love to have our wonderful panelists, who I'm so grateful for, introduce themselves. Emma, could we start with you? Emma Davidson Tribbs from the National Women's Defense League.
Sure. So happy to be here. Thank you, Lauren, and the whole team for putting this together. It's such an exciting moment, but also a really important conversation, and just so I'm thrilled to be part of it. My name is Emma Davidson Tribbs. I'm the founding director of the National Women's Defense League. We are a national organization that works on ending workplace harassment. We are beginning tackling the political workplace for a couple of reasons. One, it's my workplace. So that's the harassment that I know. That mainly means people who work in state government and city government, federal government, and others who interact with that system who may be harassed and abused. The other reason that we're targeting political harassment is if we can change the culture in politics, then those places can affect the laws that govern businesses and other workplaces. So we are mainly a research organization. We work on policy change, and we help survivors tell their stories any way that they think is the most appropriate for them.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, I really want to highlight that connection between when these political workspaces are safer and there's not abuse of power going on, that's when policy can change for the better too. That's an important connection that I always appreciate you making. So thanks for being here. Next, we have Ryan Martin from Mirror Indy, one of the publications that covered my story.
Hey, yeah. Thanks for having me on the panel, Lauren. I appreciate being here. Um, I guess I'm just an investigative journalist. I've been doing this line of work for about 15, 16 years now. I've been on investigative teams and not, and it's just the kind of journalism I like doing. A big part of what I focus on is how people use their power and influence, and whether it's for good or not. And I work for a newsroom called Mirror Indy. We're a little less than 2 years old, a nonprofit independent newsroom in Indianapolis. We just cover news for real people. We want to make sure news is free and accessible. And we also are working to repair a lot of the issues around trust that have been damaged over the years by traditional media, where a lot of people just have started to feel left out from being a part of news. Um, we talk a lot about democratizing storytelling so that way everybody can have a seat at the table. So opportunities like this to talk about very serious matters, but also from a matter or from a point of view of um, how journalists do what they do and why they do what they do. I think that's one of the really important steps to building trust. Because so much of the time over the years, journalists have sort of been, I'm just a fly on the wall. You don't get to ask me any questions. You don't get to know what I'm up to or what's in my head. And I think conversations like this are really important to making sure that trust is repaired. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And Ryan often says he's a human first. Like, I think that's something a lot of, if you haven't had experience speaking to the press, that's something that's hard to remember, right? There's people behind those headlines and bylines. So yeah, thank you, Ryan, for being here. And then last but not least, we have Andy McNulty, a civil rights attorney based here in Denver, who was very generous and just did like a quick call with me last summer and gave me so much peace of mind. So Andy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me on this panel, Lauren. Again, very important conversation. My name is Andy McNulty. I'm a civil rights lawyer at the law firm of Newman and McNulty here in Denver, Colorado. We're a civil rights firm, and so a large part of our practice is we represent whistleblowers and folks who endure workplace abuse and then speak out against it, and then are either fired for it or retaliated against in multiple different ways. From sexual harassment and racial discrimination to whistleblowers who are speaking out again about misconduct in their workplace or misconduct in general. And so that's my general specialty. And I got into this work because I wanted to help people speak truth to power and be someone who amplifies their voice and doesn't speak for them, but helps them speak for themselves. And I think that's an important thing for everyone to do, especially in today's day and age and climate, is to feel like you have a voice and someone who's in your corner helping you speak out.
And I have to say, I anticipate many people reaching out to me being like, hey, can Andy help me? Just a reminder, he works here in Colorado. So if we need legal referrals, we will do our best. But yeah, Andy, I hear your name come up all the time in these types of conversations, especially here in Denver. So thank you so much for being here. I did one thing I neglected to mention when I was introducing myself is I think it's really important to just kind of name my identities and my social location, how much proximity to power I have. So like I'm a white, cisgender, straight woman. I come from a mixed class background. I'm college educated. I'm a US citizen by birth. English is my first language. I have a lot of very advantaged identities that have made it easier for me than for other people who don't have those identities to speak out and come forward. Of course, that doesn't mean all of it's been easy. And there are parts that some of my identities are oppressed in our current systems. So there is a lot of messiness here. I also don't want anything that I share here or that's communicated here to come across as I'm telling everyone you should speak out, that this is the right decision for you, because it's very individual. And the goal here is for you to just have the information that I wish I had had all those years ago, and the support coming out of this event today to be able to navigate forward, whatever that looks like for you. Because the goal is ultimately to have healthy workplaces. Because I know for me, I just wanted to do my job. I just wanted to do good work and help my community. And a lot of times the abuse within workplaces makes that impossible. So I just felt like it was important to name that. Briefly too, before we get into questions, I also want to acknowledge, everybody needs something different to feel safe in a space. So I can't guarantee that this will be a safe space. I can promise and commit to it being a brave space. So harm happens, especially, as a white woman facilitating, I've certainly made mistakes, and that will happen. And I can definitely commit to doing my best to repair when that comes up, if that comes up. And I just want to encourage anybody listening, whether here live or later, do whatever you need to take care of yourself. So if this becomes too much, or you just need a break, or you need to come back to this later, please do that. Because yeah, I don't know what you need. So I just want to encourage you to tap into that inner wisdom for yourself. Last other housekeeping thing before I jump into questions is if you have questions as we go, for attendees, you can click Q&A and ask a question. And remember, you can check the anonymous box. Feel free to submit them. If you happen to hear it answered or asked already by me or by another participant before we get to your question, I would appreciate it if you would delete it or mark it as done. I'll do my best to keep track of that. But feel free to submit them as you think of them, or just write them down so you don't forget. I just wanted to read something that I heard from Dr. Sunita Saw. She's the author of Defy, The Power of No in a World That Demands Yes. I heard her on Adrienne Marie Brown and Autumn Brown's podcast, How to Survive the End of the World. And she's talking about whistleblowers. She said they're often seen as troublemakers, but they're actually the people that are taking responsibility and very much believe in the organization's mission. And that is what motivates them to do something about it, because they're really connected with that. They're believers and they want the organization to do better. That's the whole point of speaking up. So I hope that's something folks can carry with them from here today. So I would love to just start by hearing from our panelists how you got started in this work in the first place, what brought you here, and yeah, how did you end up here today? Maybe Emma, do you want to take it first?
Sure. So my background is I am a state legislative campaigner and advocate. So I'm a professional troublemaker in a lot of ways. So I have worked in state legislatures my entire career, and pushing policy, stopping bad policy for a variety of topics, anywhere from solar issues to women's issues to guns to veterans issues, all of them. And therefore, as I said, politics is my workplace. And we consistently saw, my co-founder and I, who also has a similar background, consistently saw these kinds of harassing comments, sexualized comments that we would certainly get as outsiders coming into a state legislature, but really saw it for the people who were in those legislatures every day, the lawmakers themselves, the journalists, lobbyists, advocates coming in from other organizations. And for both of us, we had a very close friend in separate legislatures, in separate states, who were severely harassed by a sitting elected official. And so we were there, reviewing testimony and, chatting about the lawyers they were looking into getting and sending wine and offering to get them out of the state if they needed to. And in both cases, it was the women who abandoned them. It was the women lawmakers who didn't want to be seen with them, or other women lobbyists who didn't want to have meetings with them. And we said, that's it. We got to start something. We got to do something about this, because this is when women should be coming together. Survivors should be coming together. And for those of us who can see it, but maybe haven't experienced the full scope of the abuse, it's our job to come and stand up for people who, from our perspective, have carried the load on their back for generations. So we started National Women's Defense League. We launched officially in 2022. We've been doing the work probably about 5 years prior to that. And we're consistently just inspired by the survivors that we get to work with and talk to, and are so honored that we hear their stories, even if they have not gone public. And so now we've taken the step into, we got to go change the policies and actually go make these workplaces safer for everyone.
I love it. Thank you, Emma. Andy, how about you? How did you come to do the work that you're doing today? I know you went to school in Missouri, right?
Yeah, I went to college in Missouri, and then I went to law school in Chicago. And then after law school, I started working at the ACLU in Missouri. And I like to say that I was baptized in the fire of Ferguson. I represented protesters and folks who were speaking out in the streets. That was how I kind of got into civil rights work initially, and that transitioned into representing people who were speaking out in their workplace as well. And so I went from representing protesters and other folks who were exercising their First Amendment rights to representing people who were in the government, people who were in workplaces, big corporate environments, who were being retaliated against simply because they were speaking out against misconduct and naming their abusers and things of that nature. So that's how I got into this work, is helping people, again, speak out and exercise their rights and counsel them to make sure that they could do that.
And we're so grateful you do. Thanks, Andy. Brian, how about you? How did you come to be a journalist and get into this type of work?
Well, I think Andy and I probably overlapped a little bit. I used to live in St. Louis. I think my wife and I moved maybe a month before Ferguson happened. So very formative experience for me in my journalism career to watch all that coverage. And I'm a longtime criminal justice reporter. When I hear people reflect on some of the things that they've done wrong in their careers early on, or in their experiences, I think about some of the harm I created as a criminal justice reporter before I kind of grew up and understood the impact of what I was reporting. But when it comes to the work I do today, I've worked in local newsrooms my entire career, and it's just what I want to do for the rest of my life. It's because when I interview people, when I report on something, they're my neighbors typically. They're people I run into, and there's a real responsibility to that. And it's typically my community that I'm trying to make better in some way. So I mentioned I've done a lot of criminal justice reporting over the years. I think a lot of it created some good, some of it not so much, but most of it I think has been the kind of journalism I'm proud of. And I've also done a lot of investigative reporting over the years. I think that started primarily when I was working for the Indianapolis Star. I was on the investigative team for about 5-6 years, something like that. Then I did some investigative reporting over at the State House in Indiana. And then I joined Mirror Indy, which I talked about earlier. And now I'm an editor, where I occasionally do some reporting. It's how I met Lauren. but I do a lot more investigative editing these days. I'm working with a lot of reporters who are just a fantastic team to work with.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about the folks on your team, Ryan. It's always been, yeah, I've always felt very comfortable talking to everybody. So yeah, thank you for everything you do. This question, Andy, I think I'll start with you for this. Because I know for myself, it took me a minute to digest what had happened to me. When I was in the abusive work situation, I often felt like it was my fault. I also just, as a trauma survivor in other circumstances, I know that's very common. And I think one of the challenges a lot of us come up against is not even realizing that what's happened is abuse. And then you face things like, well, why didn't you say something sooner? And stuff like that. And that makes it really difficult to come forward, or even more difficult to come forward. So in your experience with your clients or just folks you talk to, what does workplace abuse look like? How can we identify it when we are experiencing it?
Yeah, it can take many forms. It's almost hard to define because it can be so many different things. It could be, you're held to a different standard than everyone else in your workplace and unfairly targeted in that way. It could be through, microaggressions that turn into macroaggressions, that happen over a period of time where it feels like maybe you don't pick up on it because it started off small and it's become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like a small ball rolling down a hill. It could be things like you're getting paid less than people who are performing the same work as you, and that and you're not as respected as those other people. And then it could be things that are so overt as, I've seen people be called racial slurs. I've seen women being constantly sexually harassed and things of that nature. And ultimately, sometimes it ends up in termination or demotion or something like that. And that is the moment when I think it hits most people, is when those bigger things happen, and they look back on all the things that led to that. And they're like, oh, this has been a long pattern coming. So I think, looking at the small things sometimes can be helpful because it can help you realize, okay, I can see this train coming down the tracks of what's going to come. And maybe it's time to talk to someone and get some advice about what to do.
Yeah, it's definitely easier the sooner you do it, but right, like it can take a minute to even realize what's happened. I know for myself recently, I had to put together like a timeline of everything that went down. And even though I've told the story a million times, it was like, holy shit, like this was really bad. And then seeing the gradual, it's like a frog in water. It doesn't realize the temperature is getting turned up until it's too late. And then the impact afterward is what you really feel. Emma and Ryan, do you have anything to add about like what types of workplace abuse you've seen with the survivors you've worked with, or that you yourself have experienced, if you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. I obviously agree with Andy. I think the pieces that we've seen is, especially because we focus on workplaces that don't have a traditional HR department or a traditional set of, guiding community principles. So, we're talking about campaign workers and legislative staff where it's not a 9 to 5. It's a 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. kind of job, and you're moving around, and places where the camaraderie of, we're up against something or we're working towards a really big goal can sometimes mask the pieces that are actually harassing activities. It's a lot about friendships, and it's a lot about late nights and, weird travel schedules. And those are the times when you let your guard down and you don't always recognize that, oh, I wasn't really comfortable with that conversation, or that's stuck with me in a weirder way. So for us, there's a lot of, we always suggest like a lot of documentation. Write yourself a voice note, put it, just continue to document it for yourself. But I think those are the moments, at least in our experience, that have been, because it's not a traditional workplace. I think a lot of people are kind of like, oh, well, HR will get it, or, oh, there's a code of conduct. And when if you were working in an environment that doesn't have those safeguards, it's even more important to just trust your instincts. And if you're not comfortable or you feel like something's wrong, write it down.
Amen. And especially like substances tend to be involved, at least in political spaces. That played a role in my story. And that can also layer on the shame that makes you question. Like, I really felt like I was going crazy for a while. Yeah. So I'm really glad that you kind of underscored that. Yeah, Ryan, I saw you come off mute a second ago.
I was going to say something really similar to Emma, and I would just plus one what she just said. The other part of that is in politics, in nonprofits, in a lot of like mission driven type of workplaces, the mission itself uh, is sort of a tool for abuse or harassment. Because you know, based on the people I've interviewed over the years, that just comes up a lot. Like you kind of look at you don't take something you maybe like are willing to look aside at something because it's part of the mission, and you just understand that's just the cost of doing this kind of work. And of course, that's not true. That's not how it should happen. But when you're in that space, sometimes you think that.
Yeah, I think this is something that's a red flag for me sometimes as a lawyer when I hear clients say, "Well, they said it was like a family, this workplace," and that's something you got to watch out for, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Or like anytime I see a job description that's like fast-paced environment, or you may be asked to perform duties outside of this description, it's like, ooh, okay, this isn't good. And yeah, especially that kind of greater good argument, right? Like a lot of um I would say not always overt, but a lot of the messaging I've received is like, well, you're giving Republicans a win by going after sitting Democrats or by speaking out about bad behavior from sitting Democrats. When meanwhile, I'm sitting here thinking how many amazing qualified women, young women, women of color who don't abuse the people who work for them or don't abuse their power and do creepy shit could be in those positions and making amazing policy. Like we really settle for crumbs because we think that's all we can get sometimes. So yeah, I'm glad that you all brought up how the mission can kind of get used as one of the tools. I guess one thing I'm curious about, in what circumstances, and Ryan, I know you're not going to advise people, but maybe for Emma and Andy, in what circumstances, like if a survivor comes to you or someone who just feels like something's off at work comes to you, let's say there's either not a great HR process or there is, and they've already gone through it and accountability hasn't happened. Like what does that circumstance look like where you would say, hey, have you thought about going to the press, that it might be time to go and speak publicly? Emma, do you want to start?
Sure. I think for us, the press is an incredible ally. We are so grateful for the journalists that that not only acknowledge that these issues come up and tell these stories, but who do it in a really trauma-informed and nurturing and supportive way. We've certainly worked with reporters who have not behaved that way. We don't work with them again. But you can tell, at least in our experience, we can tell when a reporter and a journalist is really trying to get to the crux of the problem, and it's not just a salacious, we want to sell newspapers kind of situation. And we're just incredibly grateful that those people exist. For us, we will never tell a survivor they have to tell their story publicly. We will never ask a survivor to tell their story publicly. That is a decision for the survivor themselves. And the best piece of advice that we give survivors is make sure you have your people around you, because once you go to a reporter and your story is published, it can be a lot. It can be a lot of attention. It can be a lot of questioning. And so to have the people that you really trust who can provide that barrier and that protective layer is for us really paramount. And we do not suggest people talk to reporters until they have that group kind of around them. We also will say finding a reporter who you trust or the kind of outlet that you want the story to be in. You know, I think a lot of people assume that means the New York Times or the Washington Post, and that's it. When in reality, there are so many different ways to tell your story. I cannot say enough good things about nonprofit newsrooms. They are, I think, the lifeblood of really this resurgence of trusted news sources. There are bloggers and podcasters and people who can give you a chance to really dig into your story more. And so for us, talking to a survivor about how they want their story told and in what context and potentially to what effect, is it you want your business to change their policy, you want people to know your particular story because it deals with a specific abuser. Those are the pieces we will try and draw out to make sure that we're going to not just the press at the right time, but the right kind of press.
Yeah, so really having your support system established first. Yeah. And I will say too, like people who love you are probably going to say don't do it because they're afraid for you. I actually have a very close family member was also a whistleblower in a totally different industry and in a much, I don't want to compare, but in a really just heartbreaking circumstance where she spoke up. And even she was like, be really sure, like, can you live with yourself if you don't do it? You know, like asking me those kinds of questions. So whether it's a therapist, friends, whatever, have your people around you first, for sure. Yeah. Andy, what do you have to
And
say?
I'm those people who are around you, hopefully, is the idea that you come to me and I can give you some advice about, hey, I've seen this is what could happen to you if you come out and speak out to the press for sure. And even in filing a lawsuit, because a lawsuit's a public filing, so before you would even take legal action or think about it, that's something you have to think about is that if you file a lawsuit, it more than likely will be picked up by the press, and you'll have to deal with that fallout. It's not something that's going to be private and just swept under the rug. So, yeah, I think that it's important for people to really take stock of not only when they speak with me, I try to give them not only their legal options, but their practical options in life and how this is going to affect their life overall. Speaking out and coming forward and engaging in a lawsuit that will take years and years and years and years and will allow the other side, the folks who are your abusers, honestly, to dig into your personal life in a way that they couldn't if you didn't file a lawsuit. So that's something I like to talk about with my clients because these are real things. It's not just about holding people. It is about holding people accountable, but it's also about protecting yourself on some level. So
100%. Yeah, because litigation may not always be an option. You know, in a state like Indiana, my statutes of limitations were out for both felony and misdemeanor things. Like there was only so much time criminal and civil action could be taken. So and like you said, that opens you up to potentially like the abuse continuing through the legal system, which that's just, the reality is that's the system we have currently, and that's the only way to get accountability. And it puts a different spotlight on it, and it also changes what you maybe want or don't want to say publicly as well. So if speaking out is really important to you, and being able to tell your story on your own terms, that might be something to consider. And Andy, one thing that was a barrier for me initially was I don't even know how to find a lawyer. Like the couple of times when people from the campaign I worked for and from the state party reached out for like an informal conversation, I at least knew enough to say, I'm not going to do that without a lawyer. But I, largely as a result of having to quit that job and just a lot of the consequences of like surviving that abuse, I was really broke. Still am a little bit. And so like, how do people go about finding legal help if they, assume they can't afford it? Like, do you have any suggestions on that?
yeah, so well, for me, I do a lot of pro bono work. Number one, I think that lawyers who care will do a lot of pro bono work. Also, if you're someone who has had some sort of legal wrong happen to them, if you're looking for an employment lawyer, generally speaking, if you do have a solid case, they will take it on a contingency fee basis. So you don't have to pay anything up front. They'll front costs for you, and then they'll get a percentage of whatever you get in the end of any lawsuit, whistleblower lawsuit or otherwise. So that's something that is hopefully not a barrier because of all the people who are willing to do pro bono and contingency fee work. Although we don't have enough civil rights lawyers in this country, that's for sure. In terms of how do you find someone who's a good lawyer, that's a good question. It's a hard thing to do, I think. There are local publications that publish awards that are like trustworthy awards because some lawyer awards are just bought and paid for awards that aren't real awards. But but I think that there's also national organizations like, especially for folks in employment, the National Employment Lawyers Association, like that is a good referral source for folks. Honestly, word of mouth isn't really good. If you know a lawyer, ask a lawyer. And I know that's something that's kind of a privileged thing because I didn't know any lawyers growing up. But even if you just ask a friend of a friend of a friend who's a lawyer, generally speaking, they know who the good lawyers are. It's kind of a community thing. So that would be my best advice for that situation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I just started asking around because I realized, and actually Sarah Parody, one of our amazing councilwomen here in Denver, when I was texting her last summer and like freaking out, like what I'm going to do, she goes, you know what? A lot of attorneys, they may not offer the pro bono consult, but if you ask for it, they'll do it. So like there are some firms where they have a policy where they won't necessarily just put it out there that they'll do it for free. But if you ask and say, I'm in a financially difficult situation, like here's what's going on, sometimes they'll be willing to throw you a bone there. So so don't be discouraged. And for folks, I know we probably have a lot of Indiana people listening, and I know there was a question in the chat that came up. If you're in Colorado, definitely contact Andy. I will make sure we share contact information after this. I also have a couple folks in Indiana I can potentially refer you to if that's something that would be helpful. So just keep that in mind. So when it comes to speaking to the press, one of the things that, even though I've worked in political communications for a very long time, and I'm, pretty comfortable with knowing what on the record, off the record, all that stuff means, I didn't really understand the legal side of that. Like what happens if my abuser sues the publication and I've decided to remain anonymous? Will they give me up? Like all those dynamics was something I had to really think through. And Ryan, I'm wondering, like, because I think you and I even had this conversation about like, hey, what happens if Mirror Indy gets sued? And because at the time, just for some context, I had been talking about my experience on social media since 2017, but I didn't, because there were no other survivors coming forward about this particular guy, I didn't feel comfortable going on the record in the press alone because I knew I was going to get destroyed. I already was behind the scenes, and like all these bridges I had were just torched already. And so when Caroline Ellert, who I had hired as an intern on that campaign that I ended up quitting, came to me, she reached out via a web form on my website back in, I want to say fall of 2023, and said, hey, I think I'm doing this. Do you want to join? Initially, I'm like, fuck yes, let's do this. Like, I'm so ready. But then I had to slow down and be like, okay, wait, what are the actual risks? Like, can I speak on the record, but keep my name out of it? Can I speak just off the record and back her up? Because I really wanted to have her back, especially because we have the same abuser. And so Ryan, I'm wondering if would you be up for like walking us through what on the record means, what off the record means, what on background means, all those little terms that get thrown around, but that I think a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, of course. And just one thing that's important to keep in mind as part of this conversation is that if you're someone who wants to go talk to a journalist, and it's a journalist who typically does like investigative type work, or just there are some journalists who are like primarily focused on like daily journalism, on breaking news, or they're in the kind of work where they don't really have time to slow down very much and like and stop and have a lot of like deeper conversations about the type of stuff we're talking about today as part of their work. It's one thing, but if you're talking to like an investigative journalist or someone who does that kind of journalism, oftentimes you can talk to them and it's not like they're going to try and publish a story the next day. You can have an informal conversation. You can ask a lot of questions. Um, it's not like you're under oath, and suddenly everything you say is now potential to get published. And I just really want to reiterate that to people on the call, that it's oftentimes it's okay to talk to a journalist first, or as part of the conversation. It's not as if today I'm talking to a journalist, tomorrow it's published. Okay, so with that little caveat, I would also just recommend people like really be on the same page with the journalist about all of these terms, off the record, on background, because a lot of different people have different understandings of what those terms mean. But for me, If it's on the record, it just means, I could record everything that's being said. I could publish it. Everything's on the record, right? If it's off the record, I basically have to pretend like it didn't happen. It's more just we're talking. I'm not trying to record it. I'm not trying to take notes. And those types of cases, it's really I don't do off the record very much with people who have positions of influence and power, because over time they've learned through their like vast resources and teams of public relations on how to abuse that in the press. But for people who don't have those positions of influence and power, I'll do it pretty frequently. It's sort of like a way to provide a little bit of balance in the community and help them understand kind of what I'm about, what I'm looking to do. Tell them the kind of questions I would probably ask, either on the record or on background, which is the other term, which basically means the things we talk about, I can pretend that they exist. I can report on them, but I can't attribute that information to the person I'm learning it from. And then sort of a negotiation of what they're comfortable with, and what I'm comfortable with. I don't think I'm missing any other details about that, but Lauren, was there anything else?
Well, one thing I'm glad that you named that those definitions aren't always the same from journalist to journalist. So it's important to be on the same page and just ask. It's always awkward, especially if you might know them already, to be like, when I say this is what I mean. Is that cool? One thing that I learned from Lisa Calderon, who ran for mayor here in Denver, was if you want to have an off the record conversation, say, is it cool if we talk off the record, and get a verbal yes or no from that person too. Just like very clear communication is so important. But generally, if you've, Googled this journalist, if you've read some of what they've done, hopefully you have a feel for their ethics and what they are spending their time on, and you trust them enough to at least have the conversation. And that they're not trying to pull one over on you, right? Like, as Ryan says often, he's a human first. So yeah, and I guess anything else on that, Andy, Emma, that you want to add on the record, off the record, on background, how to approach that?
Yeah, just from a legal perspective, in terms of, subpoenaing, a news organization, they often can resist those subpoenas on First Amendment grounds. If you're whistleblowing on something that you're not supposed to have the information, if you, for example, have information that's, protected by law, and could be criminal if you are disclosing it, those sorts of situations are where it gets legally tricky, where the government could override those kind of press protections and still get that information. So just something to think about if you're going to be a whistleblower and you're disclosing information that is legally protected and could be criminalized. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like Edward Snowden, right? Like there are stickier cases, and that's why having that conversation with an attorney before you speak to anybody else is really helpful.
And
One other-
even if you're giving information that's like confidential to a business, it can be tricky too. So just like trade secret stuff like that, like just be careful with that too.
Yeah, depending on what you've signed. Like, I never signed an NDA or anything, and NDAs are difficult, I think, from my understanding, to hold up and if someone tries to call you on that. But I didn't have anything I'd signed, so I was like, well, I can kind of do what I want, I guess. One thing to consider, and Emma, we had this conversation once about, like, sometimes smaller publications in smaller towns may not have the legal backing that like a larger publication would. Or Ryan, in your case, Mirror Indy is an independent publication with grants and these larger funders that, it's unlikely they're going to fold if they get sued by a subject in an investigation. So Emma, would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because that was something I hadn't really thought of.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we see a lot of the instincts for people is, I want to have my story in like the New York Times, is because if they are ever sued, they have a huge suite of lawyers that can go up against them. It takes a lot to sue the New York Times. And so there are smaller publications, particularly local and state-based groups, that don't have that kind of resource. which doesn't mean you shouldn't go to them. Typically, those are the reporters, at least in my experience, that can put real time and context into your story. They know the workplace landscape, but those are also the reporters that you're both kind of on the journey together. You're both taking this on and saying, like, if we're going to go do this, then those are the reporters I find that also really want to make sure they're buttoned up. They've got they have the documentation. They have they are going to be very clear about, I have an on the record confirmation from this source versus this source. And it's certainly not, those are the reporters that are not going to turn around the next day and publish a story. They are going to make sure that they really have done their due diligence. And I think typically for us, when we are getting ready to publish a story like that, or we're supporting a survivor whose story is about to come out, it's, can you tell us a week in advance so that we can be prepared, that we can move the survivor if needed, or they can make sure that their mom's in town, or that they've got their group of people around them. And those reporters are the ones that, because they don't necessarily have 30 lawyers in a room kind of backing them up, who are going to make sure that they're doing everything step by step and really very carefully.
Yeah, Ryan or Andy, anything to add to that from your experience?
Well, I realized I didn't actually answer the question you asked me, which was if I faced a legal threat, what would I do, basically? Which is no. Well, I have been sued before a couple times, and I just won't I don't give anything up as part of my reporting. I'll confess here that I'm not dealing with like national secrets, and I'm not, no president's coming after me or anything, right? But there have been powerful people and powerful attorneys who've either sued me or the workplace where I was doing the journalism, or both. And we do a lot of due diligence before we, as part of even preparation for interviews, let alone for what ends up being published, to minimize those kinds of risks in the first place. But even if we do get hit with a subpoena or sued, we fight that tooth and nail. There's no situation where if someone talks to me off the record or on background that I'm giving that kind of information up to anyone. I mean, even when reporting on circumstances for some of those stories last year, I had interviews on background with people individually, and then later other journalists from my newsroom were going to come on board and do some reporting as well. But before they learned any details from any of those interviews, I talked to people who I followed up with the people and asked them like if they'd be comfortable if I share some of the information with my colleagues. Like, we take it that seriously to really minimize any sort of risk for that kind of thing to ever happen.
Which I really appreciated. Thank you. What I was fearful of happening has happened, where I had a question that flew out of my mind. So give me 1 second here. Oh, Andy, the thing that we talked about last summer that helped me feel more confident about not only going on the record, but putting my name on it, which initially, there were 3 of us women who went on the record initially. I was the only one who used my name in the first story from Indy Star. Then by the time Mirror's article came out, which I think was 2-3 weeks later, Ryan, let me know if I'm wrong. Not long after, but it was more in depth, and I would say had a lot more content. By then Caroline felt comfortable putting her name with it too. Our other friend stayed anonymous, but was on the record with her quotes and stuff. I was worried about getting sued for defamation, even though I knew I was telling the truth, even though I knew I had documentation, which is why documentation is so important. And so it was helpful for me to hear, here's how likely that is, here's what could happen. So Andy, would you mind talking through that a little bit? Have you ever had a client sued for defamation after they've come forward?
Yes. It's happened before. And it depends on what state you're in too. There's some states that have enacted laws that protect you more so than others. So here in Colorado, we have what's called an anti-SLAPP law. SLAPP is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's basically using the legal process to try and silence someone, and knowingly doing that. So here in Colorado, if you are sued for defamation, you can file this special motion to dismiss that lawsuit and get attorney's fees against the person who filed it. It's kind of like a deterrent to defamation lawsuits. So I've done a number of anti-SLAPP cases where I've had folks who've spoken out, and then we've used that tool to defend them and also hold those folks accountable who are misusing the legal process. There's always a risk when you're speaking out that someone could come after you in one way or another. That could be in your workplace. If you're still working at the place and you're speaking out, obviously they can come after you. Defamation lawsuits certainly happen. Usually when you're speaking out against someone who is a powerful figure. And there is a much higher bar for defamation lawsuits when you're speaking out with respect to public officials. And they have to prove that you are essentially like willfully lying or maliciously lying about that person in order to it's not just a little mistake of fact or something of that nature. So there are some more protections for you, but it is something to think about when you're speaking out, is that's a consequence that could happen. The nice thing is that there are lawyers out there, again, who will do these types of cases pro bono, like those anti-SLAPP cases. I'm not charging people by the hour to do them. I'm hoping to get the other side to pay my fees. That's the beauty of it. In other states, I know that there are folks who do these cases pro bono because they care about folks who are whistleblowers and want to protect people who speak out. So I think, talking to a lawyer before you actually do speak out is important, because like Ryan has to do, that you should button up all of your facts. You should make sure everything you're saying is 100% factual and can be backed up by something that you've experienced or that you have documentation of, just to insulate yourself from the potential of a defamation lawsuit. Because the truth is the ultimate defense in a defamation lawsuit. So having the truth on your side and having the goods to support that is important.
I'll also note that it's one of the legislative trends we've seen this year in states is we've seen probably about 15 or 16 states introduce laws like the anti-SLAPP effort that is going on in Colorado. So it is a movement currently that more and more state legislatures are seeing that there needs to be more protection. So people who have come forward cannot be sued. We obviously have not gotten them all passed yet, but we're moving in the right direction.
Do you happen to know if Indiana has one? Anybody?
I don't believe they do.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. And there's also an effort at the federal level to do it too, because in federal court there is no anti-SLAPP legislation, but there have been pushes from legislatures at the federal level to pass an anti-SLAPP type law.
Okay. Yeah, because I really want to underscore the piece about if someone's a public figure, there's a higher threshold that they have to meet legally to prove, like, I think you said you're just maliciously lying. And so for me, speaking out about Joe Hogsett, mayor of Indianapolis, he's a public figure. Thomas Cook, who was kind of the main perpetrator against me, he was chief deputy mayor for many years. He had spoken on the record for the mayor. He could be considered a public figure.
He is a public figure. You could
Yeah.
say that. Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't feel as worried talking about them. Of course, Andy, I can't remember if you or another attorney said this to me, but anybody could find some bottom feeder lawyer who's just willing to file lawsuits and make your life difficult. I'm honestly surprised I haven't faced that, just given the personalities of the people that I've been talking about and won't shut up about. But they also have to weigh the risk that if they bring that lawsuit, then they are also subject to, I'm assuming, discovery. And I would imagine that these two men, at least in my case, don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about is, you might think, oh, they're going to come after me. There's a thing that is called the Streisand effect. It's basically, if you file a lawsuit or raise it again, it's going to get another round of press, right? And so that is something that, would discourage people from suing you for defamation, because not only would the filing of the lawsuit then do another round of press, then any other, things that happen in that lawsuit, like if there's a motion to dismiss or there's a trial, there's reciprocal discovery. You get to ask them as many questions as you want on the record in a deposition. And if you have a good lawyer, you get to really go after them. So that's something to think about in terms of, the fear of speaking out of a defamation lawsuit. There are real risks to the person you're speaking out about for filing that defamation lawsuit.
Yep. Yeah, and honestly, I got to a point where I'm like, bring it. I don't like I no longer say things like in my opinion, because there are, if you say something on the record and you don't have documentation to back it up or whatever, it's advised usually by a lawyer to say in my opinion or I think, rather than stating it as a fact. I've just started saying things that I know are facts as facts because at this point, like they have way more to lose by coming after me. So and I personally would love to see what comes up in discovery if that were to happen. So I'm going to pause here just for a second and encourage folks who are listening in live, if you have questions for our panelists, for me, just in general, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. There is a little check mark you can select to make it anonymous. Only Elise and I will see the question, I believe. So yeah, feel free to start dropping them in. I will say too, Zoom has changed a lot. And when I created the sign up form for this webinar, I included a field to submit your questions in advance. Either no one submitted questions in advance or the way I was downloading that data was incorrect. So I don't have them. So if you did submit a question in advance and we haven't gotten to it, please drop it into the Q&A. I want to make sure we get to that. Let's see. This is a big question, but and we've covered a lot of it already, but for all three of you, what's the best advice or information you wish folks had for someone who's on the fence about whether or not to speak out when you have those conversations? Again, Ryan, I know you can't advise people in your role, but what do you wish people knew when they've been in that position that they usually don't know coming in?
Well, what's important to me as a journalist is that they have the opportunity to ask me questions about the process of reporting and what that looks like and what they might be able to expect after publication. So like basically, I ask a lot of really invasive and intrusive questions over the course of reporting, and it's unfortunate, it's messy. But one of the things that I got to do as part of my reporting is make sure that there are no surprises when a story publishes for me or for the person whose story I'm reporting on. And that's why I'm asking a lot of questions about text messages, about emails, about recordings, about journals. Really, as much as I can remove during the course of reporting, what's provable fact versus what's opinion, or what might be perceived as an opinion. And you know, I want people to know that when they're talking to journalists, because it's uncomfortable for everyone, to be honest. Not as much for me, obviously, but it is still uncomfortable for everybody. But by the end of the reporting process, it makes it where the chance of a defamation suit is lowered, right? For me or for the person who's speaking out. The chance of any sort of political attacks is lowered. The chance for some sort of like public negative public reaction is lowered because I've done my job, basically. That's one thing I really want people to know. But I also want people to know that during that process, when you're working with a journalist like me, and there are journalists like me in every newsroom, I'm not special about this. You often have the opportunity to just say, you know what, actually, I'm not comfortable with. I thought I was ready for this. I thought I was comfortable with this, and I'm not. To be honest with you, and maybe we'll talk again later, but right now I'm not. And that has been my experience as a reporter, where I've talked to people like. Maybe we got started with something and then they just were uncomfortable with the amount of questions and stuff, but then they came back later, sometimes a lot later, and that's okay too. I'm not trying to, just like I said earlier, journalists like me aren't just trying to publish a story just to get a story published. So there's an eject button and that's okay. And that's one of the things I want people to know.
Thank you, Ryan. And I have to say, Ryan, you and Peter and Jenna, all three of you with Mirror Indy were so communicative about like reminding us like, hey, checking in are you still cool with this? And I know not all journalists will know to do that, but I think you three especially just had such sensitivity, and I'm very grateful for it. Yeah. Emma, Andy, how about you guys? What do you wish people knew when they're on that fence?
The number one thing for me is you are not alone. Even if you think this is only happening to me, you know, there are advocacy groups, there are support groups. You are not alone in seeing that something is wrong or feeling like you need to speak out. One of the pieces of research that National Women's Defense League really prides itself on is we do an annual report about the number of public accusations of sitting elected officials at the state level. And we've uncovered about 145 sitting elected officials who have had over 400 accusations against them. And so when we break down those numbers, that's at least 2.5 accusations per lawmaker on average. Some it is just one public accusation, some it's up to 45 public accusations. So even if you think it's just you, talk to somebody, talk to an advocate, talk to a friend, talk to another coworker. You are not alone in this situation, and there will be a community that is going to support you.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, Andy, how about you?
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, I think the number one piece of advice I have to folks is find someone who's going to help you navigate this situation. You know, whether that's an attorney, whether that's another whistleblower who's gone through it before, whether that's an advocacy network like Emma's. You know, it's always helpful to have people who you can talk to through the process, because it's going to be a new process, and it's going to be something that I think is very stressful to folks, obviously, and could compound the trauma that's already happened because of the abuse you've suffered. So I think it's important to find someone who's in your corner that can be an attorney. And not all attorneys are great for this, honestly. Some attorneys would be like, no, don't say anything, and really control you and control your narrative. So find an attorney. If you're going to find an attorney, find someone you're comfortable with, and find a network you're comfortable with, and who'll help you tell your story in the way that you want to tell it.
Yeah, and that's where that word of mouth thing really comes into play in my experience. Okay, so I'm looking at our questions here. So for the person who they're anonymous, but for the person who submitted the question saying my abusers are blank and blank, and then you mentioned someone they're close to at the end of your question, would you please submit another question and just put in the text, or send me a direct message in the chat if you are okay with me reading that whole question all the way out? Obviously, your name is not visible, but are you okay with me reading your original question word for word? So please feel free to send that, or I'll try to find a way to make it more, a little less specific. But the first question that came in, any advice on dealing with female on female misogyny? Yeah, that internalized misogyny is difficult. That example of women lawmakers or lobbyists abandoning the whistleblower. Emma, I feel like this one's perfect for you.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's certainly something I was not expecting when I entered this work. I really thought that, women were going to stand by, and, an attack against one is an attack against all. And that has not been the case. I think what we've typically seen is, and this is obviously a wide generalization, it is not true in every situation, but it's more generational than I think we were expecting, that women who are a bit older, who have gone through a whole other level of misogyny and have dealt with aspects of the patriarchy for even getting a bank account or getting a job in the first place, they feel that they have dealt with so much worse. And the current fights for an anti-harassment workplace doesn't come up against it. And they can sometimes feel like it is a mark against womanhood that we can't take it. And at the same time, a lot of those women that we've seen are typically in positions of power themselves. They have achieved a certain level of authority and power that they are not willing to give up, and therefore become a shield for the abuse and for the abusers. I wish I had a quick fix for that. I'm working on it, but unfortunately, that is a reality of the systemic issues that we're up against. So for the way that we have combated that, or at least are trying to, is creating networks of survivors and women who, our baseline is we believe survivors. I'm going to believe a survivor until I am shown absolute documentation of otherwise, and that has yet to happen for us. So we will believe the survivor. I don't care for us. I don't care about a political party. I don't care about background. None of that matters. I believe your story, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that you feel justice the best way we can and what's right for you. There are other women who feel that way, and we are going to help try and find that network for you in any way that we can. Unfortunately, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be other women. And I've actually been really inspired by a lot of younger men in power who have taken on this issue. It doesn't mean it should be women-led. It should be survivor-led more than anything else. But yes, it was an unexpected issue to find out the internalized misogyny that some women have.
Yeah, I have to say what I chew on late at night when I can't sleep sometimes is how much of the false narratives about me have been perpetuated by women. And I'll say, like, I saw some names on the sign up list here who I know are folks who have said some things about me that aren't true, or who parroted a narrative that my abuser gave them about me being crazy or lying, or that I dragged Caroline into doing press with me, like this just wild stuff. And I also know that and these I think are younger women for the most part, but they're also existing in a very abusive system and have probably experienced harm too. That does not excuse perpetuating harm against me or other survivors and backing up a man who is abusing his power every single day over my beloved hometown. And it's a both and, right? And and I'll say too, for myself, when I worked for Joe Hogsett's campaign, I don't recall ever turning a blind eye to like abuse or anything like that. But I definitely was told certain narratives about certain people, actually Elise included, back then, that colored how I interacted with them. And I did my best to form independent opinions of people, but my introduction into that world was through these men who were treating me so poorly. And so, like, when I was emailing people in 2017 desperate for help, and Elise was the only one out of all these people, many of whom had a lot more power than either of us did, when she was the only one who replied and had my back and has now for all these years. Yeah, you start to see people's real personalities, I'll put it that way. So yeah. Andy or Ryan, I don't know if you have anything to add on this like girl on girl crime topic, but if you do, we're all ears.
Yeah, I'll just say generally, like, people gravitate to the powerful and protect them. That's just the nature of this human nature. And so you might, I think that when people are first coming out and speaking out, they're surprised at the folks who are not in their corner, generally speaking. So I think it's important, like I said earlier, to have some people who are in your corner who you've already soft led with that, what you're going to say publicly, because people are always surprised when some people turn their back on them when they come forward.
Yep. Yeah. And you'll also hopefully be pleasantly surprised about who ends up really being there for you. You know, it might be years later, because I make the comparison of an abusive workplace to a cult a lot. I listen to a lot of cult podcasts, cult recovery podcasts. It's very similar to recovering from any type of domestic violence or other abusive situations, because you do have to sort of wake up to what's going on. And sometimes the people who are defending your abuser are doing it because they're not ready to look at what's happened to them. And that doesn't mean it's not harming you. It doesn't mean it's cool and it excuses it, but oftentimes it takes some people longer to, realize what's actually happening. Anything else to add on that before I move on to the next question from any of you? Okay. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to add that in a lot of these spaces where, like we've been talking about with politics, with government, with nonprofits, a lot of times people have like a public persona and a private one, and that that can basically, not everyone gets the full story about anyone's experience at any time because of that. But that was something that I think I learned it was eye-opening to me as a journalist when I started reporting on these types of issues, because I would see how people would say things publicly versus what they were doing privately. Uh, Both in terms of supporting the type of reporting that I was doing, even if what they were saying publicly was different, because of what Andy was just talking about. Um, so it's like tangentially related to the question, but I thought it was important for people to know.
Yeah, like I'm sure some of those folks who you spoke with on background for our piece they were probably a little more candid than what they say publicly about their boss or former boss. So the next question, this attendee, just to confirm for everybody, this person who was anonymous did confirm. I can read this word for word. So they said, my abusers are an Indy councilman and educator. I haven't found an attorney to guide me. I feel it's important to share my story and may have to do it alone. Any advice? The person is also very close to Mayor Hogsett. There was also a question right underneath this. Can Hoosiers get the Indiana attorney referrals? Yes, I will send out. I need to check in with my attorney to see if he's cool with me sharing his info. I'm sure he is. But I'll check in and I'll make sure in a follow-up there's contact info. Emma, Andy, Ryan, if you three are cool with it, I'll put some way to get in touch with you all or your websites. And yeah, all the follow-up will be coming folks' way. But yeah, for this person, first of all, I'm so sorry. Like it just sounds very lonely. And especially when someone who's hurt you or is hurting you is a person in a position of power, and it looks like you have two different people in those positions of power, that can be just devastating. So first of all, I'm so sorry. And you're definitely I'm guessing you're not alone as someone who's being harmed by those particular people, but you're definitely not alone in just experiencing that type of abuse. So advice for sharing your story, maybe having to do it alone. Yeah, for the panel, what would you say to this person?
I mean, I'll just reiterate, I'm so sorry you're experiencing it. I'm so sorry that you were living through this. I think you were right to start by looking for an attorney. I would definitely reach out to any resources that Lauren can share, or if you have a network that you can ask. The first person I typically ask for any kind of legal stuff is, I know a real estate lawyer in town, and it's just like, hey, who can you recommend in this area? And they can lead me, they can lead me to others. So don't feel like you have to know an employment lawyer or litigator. Like, if there's a guy who's helping people get out of parking tickets, they're going to know others in the legal community. And that's where I would start collecting people who believe you and who are going to stand by you, or at least give you really good advice and information. You're certainly welcome to reach out to the National Women's Defense League. We are not a direct services organization, so we don't provide lawyers, but we're certainly happy to talk through kind of what to expect and what we've experienced, and we believe you. Know that others will believe you too.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, Andy, I saw you come off mute too.
Yeah, I think, if you're someone who's trying to speak out and you don't have legal counsel and you can't find legal counsel and you still want to take the leap, and that's totally great. I think the first step is making sure you have all of your ducks in a row. So make sure you have everything that you need to prove what you're saying. Make sure you've spoken with folks. Make sure you've taken notes of conversations you've had. Make sure that you have everything buttoned up and together. And then if you do want to do it, again, go to a trusted journalist, someone who actually will cover your story in a way that will do it justice. Usually that's someone at a local paper, it's someone at an alt weekly, it's someone at one of those publications. It's not a big publication, or maybe even a local investigative journalist who does like news journalism. We have a couple of those here who will do a great job. They do deep dives into stories like that. So that would be my advice. And yeah, make sure you have everything together, very organized, and so you can tell your story in a way that stands up.
I will also say I know how brutal it is to go through all your documentation. That was part of what kept me like delayed sometimes. And Ryan, I remember we were on a phone call one time, and I think you were fact checking a few things, and I was like, I owe you all this stuff. Can you give me like 30 minutes and I'll just put it all in one folder? Because it's very unpleasant to scroll back through texts with your abuser. It's very unpleasant to just have to see all that stuff again. So I also know that process. You know, for me, I just sort of powered through it. I wouldn't recommend it if you have a therapist or a trusted friend or someone who can just hang out while you're doing it. That can also really help. Ryan, is there anything you would say to this person?
Yeah, to back up what Andy was just saying, if they do decide to want to talk to an Indianapolis journalist, like I'd be happy to have one of those informal conversations I mentioned earlier. There are, I've covered the city for a long time. There are also journalists in other newsrooms who do this kind of work. If that's more comfortable for them, I'll just mention my former workplace, the Indianapolis Star, which I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Haley Colombo is a really great reporter. Tony Cook is another one over there who has a lot of experience on this issue. And there are others, but those are the types of journalists who you can have a conversation with and kind of see, gauge if it's something you want to talk about more. And I will say, Lauren, part of that fact checking, part of the reason why it was so helpful that you were able to provide some of the documentation you were mentioning is because we were trying to tell the story narratively at Mirror Indy. It was a different type of storytelling than a traditional news story, and that's something that we tried to talk about a lot during the process to make it clear to everybody, like why we were doing it that way and why it was important. But even if somebody doesn't have vast amounts of documentation about what's happened, there's still a lot of reporting that can happen that can still make a difference. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have everything to take that step.
Right. Like you might end up just talking off the record. You might stay anonymous. And I would imagine, Ryan, you would write something like, this person says blah, 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 and instead of stating it as a fact that you've fact checked and all that stuff, right? Like there are different ways that can show up. And also, you know, journalists have a lot of conversations that other people don't know about. So for this question asker, you know, you might have this conversation with Ryan or another journalist, and they might be like, I don't know if they'd disclose it to you, but in their minds, they may have had 3 other conversations with someone who had a very similar experience. And that was one of the things that was so validating for me, was like, oh, okay, like I'm not the only one who's thought about doing this. So, and I would also say, if you don't have, you know, other types of support set up, like it's a really good time to make sure your therapist is the right fit, or find someone who is. I can make some recommendations for folks in Indy. That's something we make a note. I'll include in the follow-up email. I had a really great trauma counselor when I lived there as well. And, you know, at the risk of playing into the narrative about Elise and me is just these like difficult women who are just out to ruin men's lives, which honestly, sure, at this point, I'll take it. You know, we're here to talk too. If the councilman issue touches into like the investigative committee that's looking into my case and others right now, I probably can't get into it. I'm just being mindful about yeah, how I engage when there are people who might be involved in that investigation. But yeah, Elise, I don't want to like volunteer you, but we're both around. And if we aren't able to have the conversation because there might be a conflict of interest or something, we can definitely put you in touch with some other people who can. Yeah, Elise goes totally fine. Always here. Yes. Well, we have just a few minutes left. So, you know, for the panel, any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything that I didn't ask? Anything? Oh, wait, we have another question. Just kidding. Okay, this person says, what can we advance or enforce within HR or the formation of an HR function in these spaces? There seems to be more accountability in the private sector. Yes, indeed. Andy, what do you have to say?
I'd say that HR is not your friend. So I don't know if there's that much more accountability in the private sector. HR is there to protect the organization, generally speaking. In a lot of situations, there are HR professionals who have been helpful in some cases and have been great. But I'd say that as a function in the private sector, HR, I tell my clients all the time, they're not there to protect you. They're to protect your abuser, generally speaking. So I think we need to fundamentally rethink HR in the private sector, but I do think that there needs to be accountability in the public sector in the form of maybe some sort of independent organization that's not within the confines of the office that you're in, or even the party that you're in, or the government that you're in, that can hold people accountable. And we have those in some governments here in Denver. And so when I have public whistleblowers who are going to talk to people, I don't have them talk to HR. I have them talk to the Office of the Independent Monitor or the Inspector General if they're gonna blow the whistle about something.
Yes, HR is there to protect the organization. And this is something just, Caroline and I wrote an open letter last summer to the mayor saying like, hey, we've been asking, in my case for years, you need an independent process for reporting. Yes, I want that. And yes, one's been established kind of, but I'm hearing it's not so great. And those reports still get circulated back up to the mayor for taking action. And if you have issues with the mayor, like I did, you're kind of shit out of luck. So, the processes matter. And, it might be a situation like Andy said, where that's not the process you're going to go through. Yeah, Emma, Ryan, anything to add there?
I will say that's for us, like the big piece of policy we're trying to pass is to remove the investigatory and complaints area outside of the legislature, outside of the political process, into a neutral third party. In our experiences, if you are working in the state government, most of these accusations go through like an ethics panel, and those are usually staffed by sitting elected officials. So if your abuser is one of those elected officials, you can see where the problem would lie. So that is our big effort. That's like, if this is the hardest one for us to pass, because it is shifting and changing so much of how these systems are run. But it needs to be a neutral third party, exterior of the legislature and of the government function, that can actually not just review accusations, but do the full investigations and then put in the real accountability. What does it mean for punishment? What does it mean to then address a systemic failure that caused the abuse in the first place? And I agree. I don't think we're going to get that with a traditional HR system as we currently see it. So that's the big win for us.
Yeah, and I'll also say that like ethics panel thing, like the state Democratic Party in Indiana recently implemented that after I think something like 40 different women in Democratic politics signed an open letter to the chair, who, by the way, continued to blow me off until he left his chairmanship. And one day I will write a Substack that absolutely destroys Mike Schmoll, because I cannot believe how poorly I have been treated by this organization over so many years by multiple chairmen. Oh, Elise says now around 90 women. Wow, that's amazing. So anyway, the state party established this ethics panel. They aren't doing a whole lot. I don't know. I can't really see what's happening. A lot of times those types of things are sort of window dressing to be like, we're checking a box, get the press off of our backs. And so ultimately, like what we're talking about largely here is culture shift, because on paper policy can say one thing, and it often does, even in these Indiana cases we're getting into the weeds on a little bit, but like in practice, the power structures still are what they are. In practice, there are still people who are going to excuse some behavior for some people and not for others. There are still people who are going to bear the brunt of the harm and not others. So when without a culture shift, which is what we really need to get to, of people who hold certain values when they get into these positions of power, whether that's elected, appointed, hired, whatever, it's difficult to change things for the long run. I'm going to stop yapping and see, Ryan, do you have anything else to add?
I was going to acknowledge like one uncomfortable reality, which is something that can often help make someone's story newsworthy or of the public interest, is when they've tried these avenues of going to HR or to a person of power to get something addressed, and it doesn't get addressed. So even if the systems are failing, that's often one of the ways that's what brings someone like me in and allows me to do the type of reporting I do. So I'm acknowledging that that's an uncomfortable reality, but that kind of paper trail, those kind of steps, those are some of the questions that journalists will typically ask to try and understand. There are a lot of other steps too, besides that. People going to attorneys, people like making contact in some of the other ways that we've already mentioned on this call. But if someone does take those steps, definitely keep that paper trail for if they decide to talk to someone in journalism.
Yeah, and hopefully it also is creating documentation. That was one thing, like we still haven't gotten our hands on it between my request and journalist requests, but in theory, one of my abusers should have had a paper trail of documented bad behavior, which, you know, like Ryan said, it's an uncomfortable reality, but sometimes that can be helpful. Andy, if you have anything to add to that though, I'm definitely all ears.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just know it's complicated. All of this is pretty complicated. Well, we only have a minute left, and I want to respect everyone's time. I'm not seeing more Q&A, but if anybody tuning in later or here has more questions, feel free to send them my way. There's a contact email in the Zoom sign up, as well as you'll get an email from just my personal email account with all the follow-up. I'll put contact info, I'll put all that stuff in there. I really just, again, want to thank our amazing panel, Emma, Ryan, Andy. I'm so grateful for each of you and the work that you're doing in the world. Like, it's so urgently needed right now, and hopefully won't be forever. Hopefully one day we're all just hanging out and doing something fun instead. And thank you, Elise, for helping with all the tech stuff. We didn't have any weird security drama. This is great. And I also just want to thank National Women's Defense League, Emma's org, and Women for Change Indiana for being co-hosts and helping to spread the word. Ryan, I know you also took the step of recording a reel on Instagram, which I know for people in our generation is not always comfortable. So thank you. And thanks again to attendees. Please take care of yourselves, especially if this brought up heavy stuff. You know, take it easy today if you can, drink water, all that good stuff. And then to the person who asked about sidebarring, I will send you an email just here in a moment. But thank you all so much again. You all take care.